Hey, it's simple, you're watching Thorin channel. Shut the fuck up, you fucking bitch.
When people talk about the collective and the man-for-man skill level of Astralis, currently the world's #1 team, if not already, certainly on course to become perhaps the best team to ever play CSGO, maybe Counter-Strike in general, I get a bit confused and I start to see a disconnect between how I see the game and how I feel like many fans, at least online, the ones I see expressing their opinions, and even some people who are commentators and experts see Astralis, because I see people talking as though Astralis is the best team player. I'm with you. The best, even then, debatable. The best tactics, okay, I'm 100% with you. I think they've got the best tactics, the best in-game leader. The best skill level. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Astralis, the best skill level. I mean, this obviously ties into the HLTV.org top 20 players of 2018, where admittedly it's not just about skill, but it's about stats, and a lot of people tie stats to skill and your ability in the game. And what do you know? All five Astralis players were rated in the top 20 players for 2018. Now, yes, that takes into account accomplishments, obviously stats, etc. They get to even then have some wiggle room and pick who's higher and who's lower, depending on what stats they think are more valuable than the others or what they want to isolate and prioritize, which is how you should do these things. I personally don't see that at all. Like, to me, the idea that 5 of their players were the top 20 players of 2018, I'm not talking about just skill-wise in that sense, I consider ludicrous. But if we want to talk about skill level, when people suggest that every player in this team is the best at their role, even then I find that kind of a bit questionable, because obviously the roles help each other and the style of team helps you depending on what personnel you've got. So when it comes to skill, this is a tough one to me, because when it comes to how good the Astralis players are, you have to consider how every factor not only helps, but actually can facilitate the other factors. So for example, having really good team play aids in your fragging because it makes fragging easier. If you have a crossfire, that kill becomes easier. If one person peeks out and then the other person peeks out afterwards and you draw them so they can't kill 2 people instantly when they're opposite sides of the screen, you double peek them, for example, or you double peek together on one spot so you're banking that they can't both kill you. These are ways to make kills easier or more effective, more efficient. You look at good tactics. Good tactics can make fragging easier. That's why I often admired many of the MSL teams, even when sometimes you didn't have the most skilled players. Great tactics can make fragging even easier. Now, you'll note it's not always the same vice versa. Like, you might think, well, surely, Thorin, if you have really good fraggers, that's also going to make your tactics easier. Only to a point. Like, you need a certain threshold of fragging ability, skill level. But beyond that, you actually don't want much more than that, as opposed to wanting people who can execute the strategy, team play with each other, understand the tactic. There are teams, FaZe Clan would be a great example now, who have very high skill level, and their tactical ability to execute very poor, actually. Not very good at all. They've never gotten anywhere close to the best teams in the world tactically. Likewise, having good communication with your teammates makes fragging easier. You have a mental visualization of where opponents are on the map. You have more information on what health they are, what weapon they have, where they've just come from, which particular player it is. All sorts of aspects in those senses. Having complementary players that play well on an individual basis. So famously, Olaf Meister and Crims used to play some of the CT sites very, very well. They were both nearly in peak form at the time. You look at Taco and coldzera. Taco isn't a particularly skilled player, but coldzera plays better, it seems, when Taco's in the ranks. There's got to be a reason for that, right? If you want to look at an example of where raw skill can be attenuated by team play, having the right players at the right time, look at Fnatic's lineup in 2017 and 2016. It was the exact same lineup. It was Dennis, Olaf Meister, JW, Flusher, and Crims. But in 2016, they were one of the skilled teams in the world, most skilled teams in the world. Someone would argue the most skilled. I might even have said I agree. 2017, the same exact 5 players seemed to be way less skilled, but collectively, all at the same time. It was only really Flusher was really going that ham at that point in time. Dennis, Flusher and Dennis largely. Crims in the middle. Olaf sometimes had poor tournaments. JW had a pretty bad run of form. Now, why is that? Because of all the above that I've mentioned. There were other factors. There were other catalysts. There were other amplifiers at play than just their raw skill level, even if it then showed in their skill because you saw them get the kills. So to me, the idea that Astralis has it all, they have all the best tactics and the best team play, the best mentality, the best infrastructure, and the best skill, I find it laughable personally. So Especially as I know those players before they were in Astralis or when they were in past Astralis amps and they didn't have this insane level of frag and insane numbers. So it doesn't really work. There's not a one-to-one on your stats to your skill, regardless of all other factors. So let's talk about this then, because we're not talking just about stats here. We're talking about my subjective notion of what I consider skill, how skilled they are with weapons, how good their aim is, how good their fragging ability is. We're not just talking about we're not talking at all, actually, about team components. We're ignoring all those for the second. We're not going to talk about things that are intangibles, like how good your mentality is in the game, or whether you win clutches. I don't actually find clutches have that big a correlation with skill, personally. Like, I've considered Xyp9x one of the least skilled members on Astralis, but he's one of the most clutch. Meanwhile, I'll give you an example. I often found in 1.6, Forrest was maybe the most skilled player. It wasn't that clutch a player, really. He was all right. And in big games, he wasn't that much of a big game player. He was good. He was all right. He was in the middle to above average, but he wasn't some world beater. Meanwhile, just as Xyp9x in CSGO, you had people in Senya from Na'Vi, Lord, most famously from Pentagram. These players weren't particularly skilled in 1.6. They were fucking cash money under pressure. You put them in a clutch round, you put them late in a big pressure game, you put them in a grand final. They could be even against a Forest, and they're going to win that round. They're just going to do it. So let's talk now. We're going to contrast lineups that are around this era, and I'm going to show you how I break them down, how I see them in terms of skill, and we're going to look at them compared to each other. And basically, I made a top 10 of who I think the top 10 most skilled teams in the world are. And the logic I used for this is that there's two ways to rank by skill, and that's either total skill, if you were to add up some sort of skill value for all the players and get an overall number for the team, or you can go man for man, which is broken down or averaged across each of the 5 players. I guess that doesn't entirely make sense. In terms of like overall distribution, how good that sense. I'm going more towards the latter, but I'll make comments on the total. So number 1, actually, shall I go from number 10? I guess it does, right? You got to build up the hype, right? So we'll start with number 10. Number 10 on my list is going to be Fnatic. It's going to be the current Fnatic lineup of JW, skilled player. I wouldn't say very skilled player. He has a very specific, almost specialized type of skill. Like famously, he's very good at being on the move. He's very good at being elusive, at hitting like really crazy fast firing shots, but he's not such a steady aimer. He's not such a consistent player overall. His skill set seems very much tied to his playmaking mentality, and so sometimes he's going to look a lot more skilled when he pulls off an insane round than I think overall he is, because if you put him in one spot round after round after round, I don't think he'll have the same skill level as other players in the game, but a decent enough player. One on the lower end of this particular lineup though. Crims. Now, interesting with Crims, I would have described Crims, similar to his counterpart Xyp9x, I've often thought, as someone where the skill level's not crazy, a lot of it's just shooting people in the chest, and a lot of it was great positioning, just like with Xyp9x. But obviously, Crims has been a bigger fragger over the years, and he's more about consistency, well-rounded. But I have to say, last year, I don't know what changed in his game, but it felt like he expressed skill at a level I haven't ever seen before from this guy. I mean, I was seeing like some crazy headshot clips. I was seeing some rounds. It was like, man, I almost have to forget the old Crims I know. So I don't know what changed, but he became a pretty skilled player, actually. Not anywhere close to fabulous talents like Voxic or Oscar or Simple Nico. No, he's not in that sort of class, but a very good player all in all, especially at the pro level. Then you look at the young Brolan, seems like a particularly skilled player, right? That's one of the main things you'd say one of his main strengths. Hasn't quite harnessed it, sure. Then you've got to go Twist. One thing Twist always had is skill, and skill with most of the guns. Sure, it's very erratic, so I don't consider it particularly consistent. I'd put him kind of in the middle of this kind of a pack of this team. And then Exist, okay, not a particularly skilled player, even in the context of this lineup. But historically, he was someone in 1.6 who was a skilled player, kind of streaky aim, but good nonetheless. In CSGO, he's been a good fragging in-game leader generally. Sometimes he can still top frag. His stats aren't that great. So I'd say overall, yeah, a fairly skilled lineup actually, man for man. You add it all up. If you went for a total skill base, maybe there'd be teams below them who should be ranked above them. But man for man, I think it's a pretty solid skilled lineup actually. For me, it's a nice skill base and some good team players what gets this team by. Then, number 9. You're already going to be surprised, because number 9, I'm going to pick Tai Lu from China. Now, this is a lineup where you look at who they have. Firstly, they don't have great comms. They speak in English. even though some of the players are Chinese, some of the players are from Indonesia. So that's a flaw already. They don't have great comms. They don't have amazing team play in that sense, actually. Sometimes they function as individuals or units of players working together, like two-man unit over here. They don't tend to be as cohesive. And then you add in tactically, they're pretty weak. They kind of have this one aggressive playing style. They'll mix it up a little bit in between. And it's a lot of skill that's getting these guys their chances to win these games. That's why I have them this highly ranked up. So you look at who they have in their lineup. Bentet, pretty skilled player, very well-rounded player, guy who's one of the better Asian players. Being an in-game leader, I think, has taken its toll on them a little bit in that sense. You have Excurate. I kind of would contrast him with a JW in a sense, because even though he's quite a consistent player, he's very good in clutches, he hits like not shots and then doesn't hit all the normal shots as well. So he's a good AWPer, he's not bad with pistols sometimes. Yeah, not one of the most skilled players in this lineup. Somebody has a really nice, like, first few bullets from an AK, fits his very aggressive playing style, like streaky, but can get very hot with that individual aim. I actually think he's one of the most skilled Asian players. You go and you look at Attacker, okay, nice AK, kind of more of a brute force player for me, but there's some skill there. I think he's maybe a bit on a low in his career at the moment. And then finally, Summer. It was never about not having skill with Summer. I mean, that doesn't make sense. It's like a double negative. It was not about a lack of skill that stopped Summer, formerly Fancy One, from being a top player. It's that he didn't seem to have the mentality for it in the big games. He farmed against the Asian teams where it was easier. Then when he went against top European players, he had his problems. Okay, he's got over some of that. He's still a pretty skilled player, especially because in this team he doesn't have to be one of the best. Across the board, man for man, I like this team. I think it's a pretty skilled team. I think it deserves a top 10 spot like this, even though they're not a top 10 actual team in Counter-Strike. Number 8 is the new NRG lineup, because this is a lineup where I do think people overvalue some of the players, because like they've each had sort of like a 2 or 3 month span where they were really good, and then spans where they were just good, or they were above average. So you look at them, okay, you've got Tariq. We already know he's a skilled player, always has been, usually able to express it in most of his teams. Struggled in MiBR, but that's really the only one I think he had problems with. Then you go and you look, obviously he's the new man in. Daps obviously brings the level down, because I have to say, like, of all the players in this top 10, he's probably the worst player individually. He's a particularly poor player in that regard. Let's face it, he's just shit in that sense, right? He's not a particularly strong player. So, but he's the in-game leader. He doesn't have to be a strong player. Then you go elsewhere, though. You've got some nice skills. Cirque, well, we've seen the fast flick shots with the AWP. He looks like a pretty skilled player. Doesn't always get it in place, but that's to be a superstar. I think generally he's been a decent enough star player, and he does it so well against the low-level teams. It doesn't matter if sometimes he fails in the big match every now and then. You look at Ethan, the raw aim is very, very nice. Like, the headshot aim's really, really nice. Some other aspects of skill aren't quite there. He's a little bit one-dimensional in that sense, but overall I think the skill level is there, and he does look like someone where, if the right mentality happens and he develops in the next year or two, he could maybe be where someone like Twists is at now. He's not now, and that doesn't mean he will be, because very few players ever will be, but it's not impossible on the trajectory he's on. And then we leave Breezy. I think Breezy's someone he's got more of an all-around game for me. I think he's more of a consistent player with his rifle. Skill's pretty good. I wouldn't say he's necessarily the craziest aim on the team, but overall, in terms of consistent output, I might say he was the best at the moment on the team. Right, number 6. This is an interesting one, because I was gonna go with the old mouse spots lineup of Sonny, Oscar, Rops, Sticko, Chris J. And you know what? I wonder if I still should. I think I will. I'll say the current mouse spots only played online. I can't really know much about them. I know NRG has as well. But I'll say I'll stick with what I originally had here. And the reason why is this. Right, Sticko hasn't shown it in mouse spots, but when he played on teams like Hellraisers, even in a supportive role, he could actually have pretty good fragging. His skills look decent. I think a lot of the sort of criticism, and he also has at times a weak mentality himself in terms of being overly self-critical. I think that got to his game sometimes, and he kind of limited himself. Thought, this is all I can do. All I can do is play these spots and be supportive, and it's up to other people to be the star of the team and carry. I can't do it. I don't know why he thought that, but he did. So I actually think his skill level is probably better than people realize, but we'll assess what it objectively is now and say he's one of the less skilled players in the team. Chris J doesn't have to do as much, his stats aren't great, but we know he could be a much better player. He's a much more skilled player than he's able to show, especially because he isn't able to AWP all the time. So actually kind of underrated skill at these bottom positions in mouse sports. Then we'll go to someone like Rops, right? Skill level looks pretty good. Aim's pretty good. Still has to figure out some things like consistency, like how to play in the big game, but generally like above average player, certainly at the top level. Then we get to the two big guns. So Scunny, I think, is a player where the aim doesn't look as crazy, but it is really high level. And the technique is there, and the fragging ability is there. The best player in mouse sports, this one for me, was Oscar. Like, I think Oscar's skill level is really high level. I know his mentality can drag him down, and he's an unusual guy. And it's not that he doesn't have drive, because he can win championships, and he has done, and be an MVP. It isn't always there, though, and he can get taken out of the game and a bit tilted. But I think the skill level is fucking bonkers. And we're talking with a deagle, with a rifle, with an AWP. This guy's a very, very skilled player. So I have them actually pretty high up. Fuck, I just realised I actually put them wrong. You know what? That should be number 6. I skipped one, guys. It should have been 8 was New NRG. 7 is Na'Vi. And this is a key one here. Because here's the thing. In terms of total skill, they'd probably be higher. I think they'd probably be top 5. But the reason they're only number 7 for me, Natus Vincer, is because man for man, the drop-off happens like a motherfucker, right? So you start at the top end, simple. I think he might be the most skilled player to ever play CSGO. I think the only contender is probably Nico. I don't think there's anyone else I've seen that was on their level. Raw skill, then effective skill, then polish over the years, technique, how well-rounded their high-level skill is. It's crazy. So they've got the most skilled player, maybe ever. Then they've got Electronic, a very skilled player as well. A guy who, in terms of raw skill, probably a top 10 player in the world in that respect. So the first 2 positions, big time. And so if we're going man for man, yeah, they're right up there. Then you go and you look at the 3rd spot, Flamey, right? He doesn't necessarily have as much crazy effective skill, because aside from this last major and the odd tournament, he doesn't tend to show it as much. But we know in his past, really skilled player, really sick aim, really nice like precision, firing with a rifle. He can certainly show flashes of it, doesn't have to as much. He's more in the middle on this team. Then we have the 2 bad players. Okay, so Edward, people don't know in 2016, 2015, Edward could still frag big time. I don't know what he lost in these last few years. He makes a lot of mistakes in the game. I know at the major actually had a couple of good games, but generally his skills decayed massively. It's not effective in that respect. I mean, from 1.6, I have to figure he's got some level of good skill and good aim, but it doesn't get applied in CSGO. And Zeus, for all he could be a good fragging in-game leader at times, if you went back to like Gambit briefly, and 1.6 at times towards the end, he's been pretty bad in CSGO. Actually, you know what, Daps? I'm not sure who's worse out of you and Zeus, mate. You're both pretty fucking bad individually. So it doesn't matter, though. When you've got Simple, Electronic, and Flamey, you're going to get high up on this list. So like I said, number 6 is the old mouse spots. Number 5, this is going to show how different skill is from actually winning in the game. Number 5 is NIP. Now, I actually would have had NIP even higher up on this list, but Dennis has not shown himself to be effectively, in terms of skill, the player he was in Fnatic, the player he was in the past in his career. So he's probably got undervalued skill in that sense, because if he's in a different team, I think he could be much better, but it just doesn't show up in this NIP team. Outside of him, you got a lot of skill in this team. Like, sure, Get Right doesn't have crazy aim in CSGO, never really did, except for his spray. And he certainly has decayed somewhat over the last 2 years. So he's not that high up on the pecking order. But after that, we start to get cooking with gas. Because we've got Lekro. We know his Deagle's nuts. We know his AK burst can be pretty nice, even though in terms of raw fragging, he doesn't put up that much. Then we go to people like Rez. Like Rez, especially as an entry, what a very skilled player. What really precision aim this guy has. He can be streaky, but it can be so precise and look very aesthetically pleasing. And then, who's the most skilled player in this team? I actually think it's debatable that it's Forest and more. I'd probably pick Rez. But over CSGO, okay, it's Forest. Certainly has still crisp pixel perfect aim at times. It seems very on and off as to whether it's there. But obviously he can have those big games where he takes over. The key with the NiP team is they don't really have one player who should be a top 10 player in the world. But they have a really nice skill distribution across the team. All 5 players you go across, they either at one point in time were skilled, are very skilled, or could be skilled again. Pretty solid lineup all in all, even if they're not a top 5 team in terms of their results. Number 4, it is Astralis. Hey, they made top 5 guys, but they're not number 1. They're nowhere close to number 1. Number 4 is Astralis. We'll start at the top of the head, right? If you want to talk about the most skilled player in this team, I think it's a toss-up, actually. I think it's between Device and Magisk. Because I think Magisk, his spray is unbelievable and shows a very high level of skill. And in that respect, fantastic technique and aim. Device has such well-rounded skill and can be so precise, generally gets it off as well in the game, and now is sort of like you've seen over the last few years, he's been able to express more and more of that skill as his game started to suit that and he have aligned his mentality. Then you go to Dupree. I don't think Dupree's like a crazy skilled player. He's a guy where I don't feel like it's a lot of headshots all the time, but he's a pretty fucking good player, and he's a very consistent player, and he can play his role, which is a tough role, to a high level. So pretty skilled. And if he's going to be your third most skilled player, you can see that this is actually a pretty skilled lineup, except when you get to the other end, you see that, yeah, it evens out, because you get to Xyp9x. Between Xyp9x and Glaive, I do think Glaive is the more skilled player overall. Now, in the context of not being an Astralis, that might not be true, because when I saw Xyp9x play at the end of 1.6 and then early in CSGO when he's playing Fnatic, he had a nasty AK. He had some really sick sort of first 2 or 3 bullets with the AK. But he went away from that. He seemed to craft a different style of game for himself, you apply a different skill set and become a different player. So he maybe could be more skilled than Glaive, but in this team, I actually don't think he is. He sticks to his clutches, he sticks to his positions, he plays consistently, doesn't go for the flashy stuff, and he does his job, but I'd say he's the least skilled player in this lineup. That leaves Glaive, and the thing with Glaive is, I've seen when he was in Heroic and he was a fragger. I've seen when he played in Astralis as a stand-in ESL in Cologne 2016 and fragged. I've seen when Zonic frees him up thanks to practices and lets him frag in this game. He can be one of the best fragging in-game leaders. I don't think he is the best fragging in-game leader, aside from stats-wise. I think he's not the most skilled in-game leader in that respect. But I do think that he's a skilled player for an in-game leader, and I admire the fact that he was able to devote his mind to the game, while also now, thanks in part to Zonic and the refresh infrastructure, able to get his game to a solid level, even though I do think it's very overrated to put him in like the top 20 players of the year or whatever the fuck he was in. So then we go to my top 3. Number 3, Made in Brazil. Because the thing about Made in Brazil is, they go fucking deep. Like, start at the bottom with this one. Taco isn't a skilled player. He's right up there with the Zeus and Daps picks of the rest of this top 10 of players who aren't skilled, but they're in the top 10 because of their team. But after that, we've got a lot of skill and a lot of hidden skill at times. Like, Fallen hasn't really shown us as much the last year or so, but we've seen how insanely high skilled he can be with the AWP at least, and sometimes with a rifle. So, pretty solid if he's going to be like my 4th most skilled player. Phelps, I'm going to put as my 3rd most skilled player. This is not just counting the last tournaments. Can be a really skilled player. Outside of this team, he could be the best player on a team. Could be a very skilled player. Doesn't always express it as much in MiBR/SK though, which is why I put him down here. I consider him more like kind of the flamey level of expression from Na'Vi. Then you got the 2 big dogs. Okay, Fur hasn't been as good the last year, but you go back to the first half of 2017, my God, what a run from this guy. An incredibly aggressive player, but such a high-level fragger and so skilled, dripping with skill. I mean, when this guy came in 2015, you could see he was the Fur God. He was just way better than all the other Brazilians. It was nuts. He has a really nice natural skill level, and he's paired it with a good game. And yeah, he hasn't been on his game recently, but he's still a pretty skilled player. Then you've got coldzera. Now, here's what's interesting. I don't actually think coldzera is the most skilled player in this team. I think if I actually had to pick players of raw skill, I'd put Fur above him, certainly. I might put Phelps. And would I consider Fallen more skilled? That's a tough one. But I know, obviously, in terms of, like, as I said with Breezy, effective skill, coldzera has very high effective skill. In fact, if you want to talk about, like, what skill level you have to what you can express in the game, coldzera will be near the top. Now, that doesn't mean he's the most skilled player, but his ability to express what he does have is very, very high. And so he actually still might, in that sense, in terms of effective skill, I've no doubt he'd be absolutely one of the top 3 or 4 players in the whole world. In terms of where that overall skill level would be, that's the question, right? So MiBR, pretty skilled team all in all. Then I've got my top 2. Number 2, as of this moment, is FaZe Clan. Again, now that they've removed Carrigan, there's not even really a weak spot here. Like, Adren hasn't been doing that well generally, but he had a couple of games that were good. We know he's got a pretty good skill level, generally a really well-rounded one. Then you go and you look, obviously Rain can be bonkers aim-wise, hasn't been for the last year or so. We've seen it sort of hiding somewhat dormant entirely. Does have to play sometimes entry. Olaf used to be a very skilled player when he was in Fnatic, but he was more of a polished player then. I didn't think he had the crazy. I never thought, for example, that when him and Shox were both in very good form, I think Shox is the more skilled player of the two there. So Olaf is a pretty skilled player all the same though, and very good effective skill level at his peak. In this team, not as much, but still good. Then you go to the big 2. It's obviously Guardian and Nico, right? Guardian second, skill level with an AWP is insane. A little bit more streaky nowadays, but still generally high level all in all. Nico, pretty much skilled all the time, in all ways, at an insanely high level, and also has an insanely high effective skill level. What a fucking insane player. This is a team, by the way, which would be potentially number one in terms of total skill, and is almost number one in terms of man-for-man skill. So which the one team, what is the one team that's number one on my list? Who's beaten out FaZe Clan, MiBR, Astralis, NIP, Na'Vi? Who's beaten them out? You might like it, you might not like it. It's Team Liquid, the new Team Liquid lineup. Because every single player in this team is above average skill level. Now, Nitro can't always show it. He's the in-game leader. He has the secondary op sometimes. He has the primary op sometimes. Depends now that's Stu2K's in the lineup. But you have those games where it's absurd. Like, remember the Nuke game against Mouse Sports in the final at ESL New York. On T-side, this guy was just running out and insta one-bullet headshotting people with an AK and just breaking the map wide open for his team. This guy's skill level, when it was in 2015, could be really high. Now, not at the level of what Twists has shown us last year, or NAF, or OllieJ is best. Sure, not on that level, but high, like very promising. I'd say kind of like what Ethan is now. Then you go and you look elsewhere. Okay, so Stewie's joined the team. He's still trying to kind of find where he fits in the mix entirely. Is he going to be one of the better players? Skill level's high. I don't think it's like bonkers. For me, what I like about him is he's kind of like a mini Fur. He couples like his aggression, his playing style with his effective skill level, and that's what makes him good. I don't think his raw aim's that crazy, but he's certainly a skilled player. OllieJ, kind of in the Magus camp. I think he has a lot of natural ability in it for things like spraying. I think beyond that, though, I don't consider him the most skilled in this lineup. Naf is a really great all-around player and is skilled in all areas: AWP, rifles, pistols. Some of it's spraying, but some of it's aim. It's not like the most crisp, insane precision aim, but he has very good aim all the same. And number one has to be Twists, obviously, because his skill peak is fucking bonkers. I don't know if I've ever seen a North American player with a skill peak like this guy's. It's really crazy shit, and his aim can be bonkers with an AK or a CZ or a Deagle, whatever it might be. He's really, really high skill level. Hasn't always been able to show it, as you've seen in the last few months, but when he had that peak in the autumn of last year, my God, this was a scary skill level player. So you look across the board here, they're the number one team in the world, man for man, in terms of skill. If you add it all up for total, they're either number one or number two, I'd say. So I actually am not someone who's out on Team Liquid and thinks because they failed the major, just only making top 8, like, oh, fuck them, they're never going to do it. They've got a lot of skill to play with, and they could be very, very dangerous. They have to keep working, harness that, and let's see what the next two lands bring for what I consider the most skilled lineup in CSGO. This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas, Snazore Westerlund, James Harding, NateDOhDoubleG, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, Travis Greb, Tristan Jones, Daniel Olivar, Jiangheng Lu, and special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion, one of my OGs. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask me a question. I have a monthly AMA. Perhaps you want teasers for who the next guests are on my upcoming talk shows. Maybe you want to be part of my monthly discussion where my top patrons talk to me. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the description box link for Patreon.